we've got the 9 No's of voice customer research with Chad Eckes, and we're looking forward to it. Chad Eckes is an all-around strategy, marketing, and business development professional with background in mergers and acquisitions athlete. With 25 years of professional experience spanning roles in consulting, product management, marketing, corporate development, finance, within enterprise software and software as a service businesses. In 2008, Chad started his own independent practice, C2E LLC, with a belief that technology companies often need extra help and an outside perspective in their markets, competitors, and strategies for growing their business. Chad has served over 30 clients and via short and long-term engagements, ranging from Global 1000s to angel-funded startups, helping those achieve their goals. Prior to launching C2E LLC, Chad worked with senior leadership roles in both 3M and Accenture. Well, we're looking forward to getting the benefit of all that wisdom, Chad. So let me turn it over to you, and we'll have some fun this afternoon.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Scott. And it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today as we've kicked off ProductCamp Twin States. I know there was some great keynote speeches, and hopefully we'll keep the momentum going here. So just a quick level set to go through the session description, the one that you probably saw in short form and thought, yeah, maybe I'll show up to that one today at 2:10. So the way I laid this out was kind of using the baseball metaphor of the no-no, right? Which is the no-hitter, where you essentially pitch a perfect game, nobody gets a hit, no runs, no hits, and that's called a no-no. So you don't want to be on the receiving end of that in baseball, of course, but you got to give the pitcher quite a bit of credit for it. So I look at voice of the customer interviews as another product management sport that takes practice and precision. But you can get shut out if you're not prepared, if you don't know, how to do these things and, run these like real crisp projects. So my thought was I came up with these 9 no-nos that can help product managers, product marketers, whatnot, help your team prepare for knocking your next VOC project out of the park. So that's what we're going to focus on today. So what we'll cover are the 9 no-nos, and I'll go through those. But really what we'll focus on are the better ways to do things, right? Like, if I don't want to do this, well, what should I do? So we'll cover that, of course. I have a few tools and templates that I can share during the half hour here. And then I definitely want to cover your questions and your perspectives. So I believe we can take chat and we can take chat questions, we can take Q&A, and I know Scott will be monitoring those. If he sees one that's kind of midstream in the presentation, he'll interrupt me, and that's totally fine, and we'll go with it then. Otherwise, I'm definitely trying to be able to have time at the end to handle the questions that come through chat. So first, we're going to kick off with a couple polls, just because I'd like to get to know who's out there listening to this. So I'm going to launch the first poll here. So this first one is just, I want to know who has conducted in-depth interviews with customers or for market research in the last couple of years. So if you could just quickly submit that, and I've never used this polling before, so I'm just watching to see what's out there. Right now I've got about 2/3 yes and 1/3 no. Okay. Next, I'd like to know what flavor of market you're engaged in. So is it B2B, B2C, or maybe equally in both? So I hope I didn't end the first poll too quickly because I saw some numbers update there, but anyhow. All right, here we go. So looking like most in B2B, which is generally my area of expertise and where I've spent most of my time. So that's great. Okay, give everybody a few more seconds here to finish that one. I think we've got all the data in. Yeah, again, 2/3 B2B, or a little under 2/3. And then I probably quit the other poll too soon, but it looks like a majority of you have done some in-depth interviews, which is great. So some of these no-nos won't be new to you, but I'll be interested to hear your perspective on them and some of the tips and tools that I have. Okay, great. Back to the presentation. So again, here are the 9 no-nos in sort of rapid fire fashion, and then we'll get more into what they mean and what some of the better practices are. So the first one is trying to boil the ocean. Second is casting a wide net of customers to talk to. Again, remember, these are the no-nos. Insisting on face-to-face conversations is a no-no. Going into VOC interviews unprepared. Now that's probably like a duh, of course, you don't want to be unprepared, but I'll get into what that means. Conducting the interview like a survey, and then asking a lot of yes/no questions in an interview, also a no-no. Trying to write down everything the customer says, letting one comment from one person drive your conclusions, and then the ninth no-no is keeping your notes and information to yourself. Again, some of these might be pretty obvious, others maybe not at this point, but I'll get into each of them. So my next poll really quickly here is I'd like to know which ones everybody is most interested in. So you can check up to 3. And that'll just help me, and I think all of us, be efficient with this half hour. So I can tell, let's spend a little more time on this one, or let's spend more time on this one. So go ahead, I'll give everybody a minute here. So it seems like it takes a little while for the poll numbers to catch up as you're voting. And then I need to write these down so I don't forget. Okay, it looks like trying to write everything down is pretty popular. Letting one comment drive. Conducting the interview like a survey. I think almost everybody's voted. Yeah, so it looks like oh, wait. Oh, casting a wide net is actually up there.
Yeah, it just popped up. Yep.
It's hard for me to see them all. I have to scroll. So I think it's wide net, letting one comment, and then pretty close between conducting it like a survey and trying to write everything down.
Yeah, I think those are the solid leaders right now.
Okay. Well, we'll focus on those then. That sounds
great. Followed by face-to-face conversations. So yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, I'm going to go through them all, but it just was good to know where the interest might lie. And I know you don't know what's behind all 9 doors here yet, but we'll kind of go into that. So first no-no, trying to boil the ocean. So what do we mean by this? So when you're starting a voice of customer project, you probably have tons of demands from different departments, different people that they want to know all these answers, and they think that having a voice of customer project will get them all these answers. And so you're tempted to just go out there and have a bunch of questions, and then you're kind of scattershot with when you're talking to people, and that's just a recipe for not getting a lot of really good deep insights. So you can't really solve all your customer problems in one project. So what's the thing to do instead? So what I like to say is you scope the project around a single governing question that you want to answer. And you've got to think about what that question is, and then underpin it with other questions. So you might have to think about, you might do some brainstorming, write a bunch of questions down, and then try to figure out, which ones really underpin or drive a higher level question, and what really is going to be valuable to your organization, your product, whatnot, in terms of doing a voice of customer project and getting those answers. So here's an example that I've used in the past, and where the governing question is, what is the buyer's journey? What's the typical buyer's journey of our customer? I'm sure a lot of you have encountered that question or want to know the answer to that question. So some sub questions to that are listed there, right? Like, what are some typical catalysts for buyers in determining that they want to do something different? How do our target buyer personas learn about solutions to their problems? And then so on and so forth. I find that typically like 5 to 7 sub questions are good for underpinning a governing question. And again, a good way to figure this out is just to start brainstorming questions and things that are unknown, and which ones kind of relate to another. But again, trying to get a whole bunch of data in one project is usually not a good idea. You want to really focus in on a key problem or key question you're trying to answer for your product or your company. So the next one is casting a wide net of customers to talk to. So kind of similar to the previous one, which is boiling the ocean. You don't want to interview just any customer that you can get your hands on, or maybe you have a lot of customers and you think that's great, but you don't really understand how they're similar or different. And therefore, when you're getting the answers to your questions, you're getting it from a pretty broad group of people, which means you might not be able to draw great conclusions. So again, the idea here is to focus and identify just one or two key personas that you want to go out and talk to and target with these interviews. And you should be clear on whether you want buyer personas, people who are buying your product or using your product. And in B2C, it's often the same, but in B2B, it's not, right? We often have people who sign the checks, and we have people who use the product on a daily basis. Sometimes you want to talk to both in a voice of customer project because you want to get both perspectives, but oftentimes you want to focus on just one. Also, be sure to hone in on a customer segment. So like in B2C, you might pick out demographics, geographic, maybe age, gender. In B2B, you might say, we want to just talk to folks in this industry or of this size, or again, it could be geographic. So an example might be, we want to talk to supply chain directors at North American tier 1 automotive suppliers to Toyota who have purchased cloud-based SaaS software in the past 3 years. So that can get pretty specific, but again, if you get specific, then you're going to see more trends, or you're going to be able to identify real strengths in that voice coming back from those customers and get a better feel for what the market is really telling you. So number 3, insisting on face-to-face or video conversations, especially in this day of remote working with COVID. There's been a lot of emphasis on getting on Zoom and being able to see somebody face to face, and I think that's great. I use it all the time. But the fact is, not everybody is comfortable being on video, and even they're not even as good at conducting or being a part of an interview when they're face to face or on video. So I always try to go for the phone call personally. I think it allows the customer to really just listen and respond to your questions and do a lot of talking. They're not distracted necessarily by something on Zoom or anything else. They can't. Essentially, they're really focused on the phone. It also saves hassle and risk of internet connection issues if you're trying to do something on video and things keep going awry with their or your connection, especially if they're doing them at home. And then it saves some travel time, right, and maybe money. Like once we do go back to our offices and traveling. Phone is obviously a lot more economical. Another great part about phone interviews, and I often use this as a best practice, is I use a conference line and I record the call. And I always ask permission to do that. And I'm almost always getting a positive response if I tell them that it's confidential and that I'm the only one using it. But I think it's a really great practice, and there's benefits to that downstream too, which I'll get into. So the fourth one, which is again another one, like going into VOC interviews unprepared, of course. But the point here is that the governing question and sub questions and persona profiles are really just part of the preparation. And there's lots of things that go into it that are even more granular than this. But the big one is defining what we call an interview guide or a discussion guide. And this is where you're going to take that governing question and those sub questions and turn them into actual interview questions, right? Like, what do you want to ask people? And what do you want to start off a conversation with the question? And then what are you going to drill down into based on that theme? And so there's that, and I'm going to show you an example of that here. Another thing is researching the background of who you'll be interviewing. This might be more difficult in a B2C environment, but in a B2B environment, you can always check out LinkedIn, check the company's webpage, really make sure you understand about who you're going to talk to and their history of being a customer and what they're paying. Just again, those things like being prepared so you know who you're going to talk to when you get on the phone with them. Again, I guess some ideas about how to get smart on the customer: check the CRM system, check with sales reps, things like that. So here's an example of an interview guide, and you can use all kinds of formats, word processing document, Excel, PowerPoint, whatever. But what I like to do is, again, I like to list the main questions kind of in a single column on their own. And I think about those almost independently and how those are going to drive the conversation and drive the interview. But then in the next column, I think about what I want to listen for, what I might, have to prompt them to talk about if they're not giving up those answers. So those are really like the reminders while I'm, on the phone or talking with somebody live. And I think this is a good method. There's plenty of other ways to do this. Again, you could just have a straight, single document with bullets and one full list. But I kind of like to see it in a column format, because then I kind of think through the flow of the conversation in those main questions, and then I'm thinking about what I want to listen for or drill down into in those other things. So note the questions here for a second and how they're worded, because that plays into these next two no-nos. And number 5 is conducting the interview like a survey, and number 6 is asking a lot of yes/no questions. So why is that a no-no? Essentially, I don't believe in taking up time with my customer or myself to ask multiple choice or true, false, or rank order questions. That's what I would use an online survey for, because I think that's a lot more efficient for all parties. Same with yes/no questions. I want to ask open-ended questions, not a bunch of true, false, yes/no questions. So again, what I want to be doing on a voice of customer interview is first and foremost, get the customer talking and sharing stories. I want them to be giving me anecdotes about, day in their life, how the product or service we're, selling fits into that life. Get some emotion from their responses, right? And even if it's bad news for us, right? I don't care. I want to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that's what I like about, these interviews. When I get to conduct them, I really get to understand the customer and their life and, how our product or service fits in. So therefore, you got to start your questions in an open-ended way, like, how do you do this? Or why do you do that? Or tell me about this. Again, these are subtle little things that I'm sure probably a lot of us know, but it's good to remind yourself. And that's why you prepare an interview guide to, again, prompt you yourself as the interviewer to ask them that way, and not just essentially go to a dead end question that says, do you like how the product works in this area? And then they just say yes or no. So again, just some quick examples here. A bad question would be, do you teach career readiness skills in your courses today? Of course, they're going to say yes or no. You can always follow that up, but a better question that's more efficient is asking, how do career readiness skills fit into your courses today? One note here, I forgot I had this in here, but
I got a couple of things here that might be good to talk through.
Let's do it. Yep.
One was, would you ever use a survey to prime the interview? From Maggie.
I haven't, and I've done it the other way around, where I do primary research like interviews first, and then I'm starting to hone in on very specific facets of something, whether it's product features or trends in a market. And then I might follow it up with a survey to either the same group or different group to really validate that at a much larger level of data. Because with interviews, of course, you take more time with them, but often they start giving you better direction on where things are headed. And then a survey, I've often found, comes out really well to follow that up. I could see it working both ways. Like if you want to, screen people first through a short survey, whether they're a candidate for an interview, that's often done quite a bit. Like you want to ask them like 10 quick questions to see, maybe get some intelligence and data, but really you're screening them to see if they are the right candidate to do an interview.
Sure. And then there's some interest in the metrics. How many interviews per persona? Roughly how long do they last? Tips along those lines.
Sure. So generally speaking, if you're pretty focused on 1 or 2 personas and a governing question, the minimum you should probably do is 10 across those 1 or 2 personas, because then you might have 5 and 5 or 6 and 4, something like that. Typically, you start to get pretty good trending within just 10 interviews. And I typically carve out an hour for an interview, sometimes less, but very rarely more. You just need at least 45 minutes to really start getting some momentum and again, build rapport and get some questions answered. But again, 10 is usually a really good number to have in mind, kind of first cut. A lot of times we've scoped projects where we'll say we might do up to 30, but we'll stop at 10 to see where we're at and see how many more we need and maybe how we pivot in terms of what we're asking or what kind of information we're getting.
Sure, that's great. There's a couple more here. We can pick them up in Q&A, but I just wanted to pop those in for you.
Sure. Yep, just checking time. We got about 10 minutes here, but I think we're doing well. So number 7, I know a lot of you asked about this one or you raised your hand on the poll. So trying to write down everything the customer says. So especially if you're in person, you don't want to be sitting there typing and not listening and not looking at your customer. But even when you're digital, whether that's through a video or the phone, it's just you can't really do both at once, in my opinion. I mean, there's a lot of people who can type pretty fast and feel like they're listening, but really to actively listen, you need to be focused on that. So that's why, again, I said earlier, it's great to get permission to record the interview, because then you don't have to type everything. You can go back and listen and, on your time, and you can even share that interview and other people can listen to it and you can get their take on it. But again, getting permission, I find, is almost, 99%. It always happens. I rarely have somebody decline that, especially if you tell them that, it's confidential. No one else is gonna, no one else is gonna hear this. I'm not writing an article about you or anything like that. And if it's your customer, they're probably even more willing to say that's fine, right? If it's not a customer, it's, you're doing a blind interview, or you're just talking to somebody that you haven't met before, again, you just got to give them that confidence. But again, most of the time, that's great. Now, you'll still take a few notes during the interview, and I do that. So I might say, I'm taking a note here, excuse me, or I might just do it when they're in the middle of a sentence or when there's a pause. But I do it so that I can remind myself to come back to something, or they said something incredibly pertinent, and I want to kind of underline it in my mind. So when I go back to listen to the interview, I remember that, oh yeah, that was a really pertinent point they made, and I noted that at that time. And then lastly, using that recording to review the full conversation and document key customer statements and anecdotes. And I'll get to this in another slide, but having those near verbatim or even verbatim statements and anecdotes from customers can be really powerful when you're sharing the results and the information with others, when you're sharing the results of your project. Now, a bonus point, and you can do this, it adds a little money or extra time to the project, but you can hire somebody to transcribe the recording. And I've done this a good number of times. It certainly saves me time. It also allows me to, sort of space out different things in the project. Like I can do interviews, send the recording over to get transcribed on one day, and then I can do more interviews the next day and the next, but then I'm starting to get transcriptions back within a day or two. Usually there's, 24-hour turnaround on these. So I think that's a really great thing to do if you have the money to do it, because then again, you really have the exact things that the customer said, and you can read through it and share that stuff. All right, so two more. No-no number 8 is letting one comment from one person drive conclusions. Okay, why would we not want to do that? Probably pretty obvious, but oftentimes you're going to go into these with some biases, your own hypotheses, and you might get somebody on the phone that says exactly, what you think, and you're going to say, "Oh, that's right. Now I don't need to talk to anybody else. One person said it, and it's for real, and let's move on." But that's really not the case. And what I try to do, whoops, I went a little far. But what I try to do is, again, if I've got my notes from all the interviews or the transcriptions, I'm looking for those trends. I'm looking for things that came up multiple times, not just once. And even if they disagree with my hypotheses or they're not very good news, I want to know that multiple customers are saying generally the same thing. And I make it quantitative. I look at, I count how many times these things are coming up, because those are really some of the strongest takeaways from the voice of the customer, right? If multiple customers are saying this, generally the same thing, good, bad, or indifferent, I should hone in on that and figure out how to use that to my advantage. So here's just a simple example, client name redacted of, when I do this, right? I review notes and I put them in a spreadsheet and I count them, right? And, to some degree, these aren't verbatim quotes. These are just, I'm using quotes, or I'm using things people said and putting them into some sort of theme or voice. But then I can underpin them with the actual responses that people gave me. So this is, again, a pretty simple example. It takes some time to put this down, but then you can show this to your team and say, yeah, I mean, out of the 10 people I talked to, 7 of them said that we're a really responsive company. Why aren't we positioning that way? Like, why isn't that in our messaging? Why is that not on our website? That's a really good question. So then the last no-no is keeping your notes and information to yourself, okay? So just because you have some data, you don't want to be the only person to interpret it. And I'm sure that's not the case for a lot of you. but it goes, it merits, talking about. So what you should do is, I like to think of it as an executive level report. So you've got all this data, you have all this information, you have to you do now have to kind of boil the ocean yourself of what you learned and put it into, some statements and some recommendations that your leadership and your team can react to and then take action on. So summarize what you believe are the key takeaways and recommended actions, and then back things up with the data that you collected, right? Who did you talk to? These were real customers. They have, real lives and they use our product. Talk about those recurring themes and back it up with those supporting quotes, like what people said. So here's an example of a slide, again, from the Acme company. And this is just one way of putting the information out there. But what I like to do is I'll put the major theme or the major voice that's at the top, and I'll back that up with a bunch of quotes. Like, this is what people actually told me when I asked them questions. And sometimes it was unprompted. Like, I didn't ask a question like, is Acme company always there for you? I didn't ask that, but this is what happened when I talked to them about what they think about us and how they use our product or service on a daily basis. So that ends the presentation and the no-nos. We can take chat questions now. You could even chat in some of your no-nos that you can think of and share those with the group, or mistakes you've made in the past. But in summary, again, I think learning from your customers is super impactful to your company and your product. I've used this, a number of times, both when I was with 3M and Accenture, as well as a consultant. And so then that next one is performing a VOC project when you want to gain an answer to a focused question. Again, you need to not boil the ocean, but instead come up with something that's pretty focused on, a key area of customer experience or product usage or whatnot. Again, be precise in identifying the persona you want to interview and the questions you want to ask. Again, I'll say again, recording the interviews is really great. If you, once you get the hang of it, it works pretty well, and transcriptions are great to have too. And then once you have all that data, you have to identify the reoccurring voices, summarize them, try to quantify them. And then, once you've got all the data, make some bold conclusions and back them up, right? Now you've got the data, now you have information from your customer, and hopefully you're dispelling or proving your hypothesis from that governing question, and you can start making conclusions and take some action on those.
So Chad, great presentation. For those of you online, this presentation has been recorded and will be available for some period of time. I know at least 30 days. Chad, there's a number of questions here around the handling of the intellectual property that you generate during the interview process.
Sure.
Who gets access to it? How long do you keep it? Do you ever delete it? And how do you work with your legal team inside an organization?
Sure. Well, if that comes up, then and if there's a lot of sensitivity to that, certainly you can involve legal and get some guidance on that. That has not really come up in my line of work before. Once you create once you create some reports on this or read out to your executive team, there's probably no need to save the recordings. You probably don't even need to save the transcriptions. Your job is probably to, again, take the data you've got and turn it into something that's actionable, right? So all that raw data is probably not as useful anymore. You've sort of got it down to, here are the 5 key things we learned. Here's what we're going to do about it. And now let's take action. So, that would be my guidance. If there's a lot of sensitivity to keeping that stuff on servers or your hard drive, then yeah, get rid of it, right? Only use it for as long as you need. But that conclusion, that's obviously going to be proprietary information for your organization, and presumably you're storing that securely as well.
Excellent. Chad, there's a bunch of questions here. How can people reach out to you for further information?
Oh, sure. I'm glad you asked, because I did mean to get to this last slide. This is my contact information, at least my email address and website. So you can write that down, and feel free to shoot me an email anytime.
Excellent. I think you've got about another 60 seconds here. So if there's any final thoughts, but I would just like to thank you for preparing a really well put together presentation with a lot of great content in it.
Thanks so much. It was a great honor to do this, and I hope everybody got something out of it.
Excellent. Excellent. Very good. We're going to go ahead and stop the broadcast now, and we'll see you either in one of the lounges or around the Product Camp, guys. Thank you.
Perfect.